Right now, at 41 years old, I have around £100,000 invested, which might sound like a lot of money, but if my goal is to retire at 55, the honest truth is it's nowhere near enough, because based on the plan I talked about in the previous video, I need to turn that £100,000 into something closer to 1 million over the next 14 years. So in this video, I want to break down exactly where that £100,000 currently sits, how I got here after years of bad financial decisions, and what needs to happen next if this plan is going to work. One of the strange things about money is that certain numbers feel huge when you're younger. £10,000 feels massive. £50,000 feels life-changing. And £100,000 sounds like you've made it. But when you start thinking about financial independence, those numbers take on a completely different meaning. Because £100,000 invested doesn't generate an income, it generates potential. At a typical long-term market return, £100,000 might grow by around £7,000 per year on average, which is great, but it's not going to replace a salary. And that's why the real change isn't just reaching the first £100,000, it's building from there. The slightly embarrassing part of the story is that not long ago, I was in a much worse position. At 36 years old, after nearly 2 decades of working, I had just £12,500 in a pension. That was it. No investments, no ISA, no meaningful savings. And considering I'd been working since my teens, that was a pretty uncomfortable realization. A lot of that came down to bad financial habits earlier in life. Overspending, credit card debt, living month to month without really thinking about the future. And it took several years to dig myself out of that hole. Once the debt was finally under control, I had a choice. I could go back to spending the way I used to, or I could start building something for the future. Around the same time, my career changed dramatically. I moved into the tech industry starting around £30,000 after leaving a 48k job, which felt slightly terrifying at the time, but within just a few years that career move accelerated quickly. And suddenly, I had something that I'd never had before, surplus income. And instead of letting lifestyle inflation swallow all of it, I started directing more and more of it into my investments. Today, that money is spread across a few different places. The largest portion sits inside my pensions. That includes both my workplace pension and my personal pension accounts. Pensions are incredibly powerful in the UK because of the tax advantages and employer contributions, so a lot of my early investing has been focused there. I also have a stocks and shares ISA, which is where I'm building the pot that will eventually allow me to bridge the gap between retiring at 55 and accessing my pension at 57. And everything is invested in low-cost global index funds. No stock picking, no trying to beat the market. Just some broad exposure to global companies and long-term growth. If you spend any time reading about investing, you'll often hear people say that the first 100,000 is the hardest. And I completely understand why. At the beginning, progress feels painfully slow. You're adding contributions each month, but the numbers barely move. But once you reach that first 6-figure milestone, something interesting starts to happen. The investments themselves start doing more of the work. Instead of growth coming entirely from new contributions, more and more of it comes from compounding. And that's where the snowball effect really begins. Of course, hitting 100,000 doesn't mean the work is done. If anything, it's just the beginning. Because as I mentioned in the previous video, my target for retirement is about 1.25 million in total investments. That should be about £1 million in a pension and around 250,000 in an ISA, which means over the next 14 years, I need to turn roughly 100k into something closer to 1.25 million. And that sounds ambitious, but if you break it down into my consistent investing, the tax advantages, my employer contributions, and some long-term market growth, the math becomes a lot more manageable. The focus for the next decade is fairly simple. Increase the amount I'm investing at every opportunity, keep my costs under control, and let compounding do its job. That means continuing to maximize my pension contributions, steadily building my ISA bridge, and avoiding the temptation to constantly tinker with the portfolio. Because investing success usually comes from discipline, not trying to be clever. So that's where things stand today. Around £100,000 invested at 41, and I plan to grow that dramatically over the next 14 years. In the next video on this channel, we're going to talk about one of the most powerful wealth building tools available in the UK, pensions, and why the UK pension system is actually a bit of a cheat code for building long-term wealth. If you're interested in investing, financial independence and building wealth in the UK, make sure you're subscribed. Let me know in the comments, where are you currently on your own investing journey? I'll see you in the next one.